Hey guys, it's Sally here from Strength for Dance. And today we're going to be looking at injury prevention and focusing on what we call the 3 big rocks of movement. So, rock number 1 is here, and this is the foot and ankle complex. Rock number 2, the hips and pelvis. And rock number 3 is the thorax. Now, starting with the foot and ankle. The feet are our main connection with the world around us. So this is really important that we have good function down here. What we're looking for in the foot is to be able to find center, a really good tripod setup, and being able to get good range between our pronation and our supination. That motion feeds then upstream, straight up into the hip and pelvic region. So if there is any non-optimal movement, stiffness, too much movement down here, it's going to travel upwards and affect the next area up, the hip and pelvis. The hip and pelvic complex really is our powerhouse of control and stability. This area allows for energy transfer up into the trunk and energy transfer down into the legs. The hips and pelvis work together because the hips are sitting here within the pelvic bowl. This area is also important because it's where all the big muscles of the legs come up and join in. We have the big muscles of the trunk coming in, and we also have our deep core stability muscles here. The next area up is our thorax. So this is our rib cage area. Why is this important? Well, this is the area that houses many organs, the heart, the lungs, the liver, the stomach is tucked under there as well. Breathing is essential, so we want to have good movement and expansion within the rib cage there. It's also an area that has a lot of nerve exits and some sympathetic nervous drive in here as well. So we want to be able to mobilize these thoracic joints and our rib joints here. It also forms the platform for our shoulders. So if we have a nice centered thorax, our shoulders will be able to sit symmetrically on top of that. And then obviously at the top we have our skull, which is housing our brain and also needs to be part of this stacked environment. So the movement we have between these areas is constantly moving upstream and downstream. What happens down here at the foot and ankle will directly affect the hip and pelvis, and vice versa. What happens here at the hip and pelvis will directly affect the thorax, and also vice versa. So if there is a pull in the thorax, or if the thorax isn't sitting centrally, it will create a torsion pattern that will then lead downwards into the hip and pelvis and can also lead down and affect our foot function. You may notice that there are spots in between. These spots are the knees, the lumbar spine, the neck, and then if we look out to the side, the shoulders. Now, these are our areas transitioning between these rocks of motion. They are also very common areas for us to have injuries with. So if you think back to how many times you may have had a tight neck or neck pain, low back problems, or knee issues, you can see, can't you, if the motion isn't good or if that conversation isn't strong between our 3 big rocks, these areas take the brunt of it. So if the foot isn't pronating or supinating well, and it's not working well with a stable pelvis, the poor knee in the middle is going to be moving also in a non-optimal manner, and that can lead to knee injuries. Same here. So if the pelvis and the thorax aren't moving well together, they're not having a polite conversation, the energy flow or the movement flow won't be very good, and everything will get shunted down into the lumbar spine. And how many times do we see lumbar spine problems around L4 and 5, which is one of the weaker areas in that part of the chain. Same with the shoulders. So we often will see a shoulder that may be elevated, or we've got problems here within the rotator cuff. And then when we look at the thorax, we're seeing a thorax that doesn't move well in 3D, or a thorax that might be tilted, and that's why the shoulder is sitting higher. So, when we're applying this to our injury prevention, what do we want to be looking at? Well, we want to look at our check-in, our internal check-in. Where are we in space? Does it feel like our feet are centered? What's going on with the pelvis and hip area? What does it feel like our thorax is doing? We can have a movement check-in. How well do those two relate to each other when we look at 3D movement? We then, with our results, want to find center. When we find a centered position, when we start with everything aligned, we can then start with our movement right and left. We can then start to increase range evenly from one end of the spectrum to the other. And then once we've got a centered position, we can then start doing our movement in 3D. So we can then start moving the pelvis in 3D, the thorax in 3D, and working the feet in 3D, which would be pronation and supination. And then we can start to increase our range in that spectrum, far left to far right. So that, guys, would be your program for checking in and then working on injury prevention. Remembering, injury comes about when these things are no longer moving in harmony with each other, when you have an unhappy body. So, maybe later on, have a stand, have a check-in. Where am I in space? Where do I feel there's lines of tension? Can I do some releases, whether dynamic or with a ball or foam roller, that will help me find center? Once I've found center, I'm then going to mobilize my body in 3D, trying to increase my range, increase my spectrum of movement. From there, we can have the all-important strength training. Hope you enjoyed that, guys. Bye for now.